Hello, I'm Deborah Malone, founder of The Internationalist and host of Internationalist Marketing TV. Today's guest is Lisette Arsuaga, co-founder of AIMM, ANA's Alliance for Inclusive and Multicultural Marketing. Lisette, what a pleasure to be spending some time with you. Welcome to the show. I'm so looking forward to our conversation.
Thank you for having me. I've watched a few of your shows and enjoyed them thoroughly, so I feel honored to be a part of your program.
Well, that's wonderful. Well, thank you. It's always great to have someone who's somewhat familiar. All right. Well, with that, let's start right away about you and about the ANA's AIMM, which is, for those who aren't familiar, the Alliance of Inclusive and Multicultural Marketing. Now, you made headlines recently with some new research that you've done, which shows that consumers are in favor of supporting brands that market to diverse consumers. Before we delve into those results, and probably most importantly, what that means to marketers, would you just talk a little bit about why you founded AIMM?
Sure. So in about 2015, 2016, we started having conversations with Bob Leodis at the ANA about the need to address the lack of focus on diverse marketing, the lack of prioritization of diverse segments. It was a time where total market had taken up the entire space when it came to inclusiveness. And that for many marketers meant that if you put a black face or a brown face on camera, you did your job. And that was it. So we realized that we needed to do something to have marketers understand what diverse marketing really was, to prioritize diverse marketing. And there were great, the ANA has been doing the Multicultural and Diverse Marketing Conference for many years. And it was crazy that we would go there and people would become inspired and say, oh my gosh, I have to do something different. But they would go back to their jobs and you fall into your way of doing things and you'd people would forget about what they had learned and what needed to be done differently. So we realized that there was a need for an entity that wasn't there on a 1 day or 2 days out of the year, an entity that was consistent and inclusive of diverse voices. So that's when we founded AIMM. We founded it with 36 member companies. We now have over 220 member companies representing client-side marketers, agencies, both specialized and general market agencies, research companies, trade associations, and nonprofits. And then we also represent the interests of Black, Hispanic, Asian, LGBTQ, people with disabilities, Indigenous, and elderly populations. So all of those segments that are many times forgotten or misrepresented when it comes to marketing and advertising, we are the voice for those entities. In 2017, once we had started AIMM, we wanted to establish a baseline to see what marketers knew. So we put out a survey for both AIMM and ANA members alike and asked marketers, are you including diverse segments in your efforts? And the overwhelming majority said, absolutely, we are. So then when we dug deeper and asked, well, do you have directed efforts? Do you have directed budgets towards these diverse segments? Only 16% of these marketers said they did. So that we realized that there was a huge disconnect between what they thought and what was really happening. So that's when we decided that we needed to go further than AIMM and create a research piece that proved the impact of culture in both ads and programming so that marketers and advertisers would understand the impact of when you put culture in your ads, how that is so much better than just having a person appear with no context in there. So that's when we founded CIM, the Cultural Insights Impact Measure, which is part of the CIA, the Cultural Inclusion Accelerator. And since we founded that, we now have over 1 million ad evaluations and have included 750 brands that have tested for culture. So what we have learned is that culture is responsible for up to 66% of a campaign success. So culture alone, if people get culture right, they will succeed in connecting with their consumers. So what we're trying to do is have marketers think about the way they do their work in a different way than they ever did before.
Uh, that you brought up a lot of points, and I always love, the disconnect with, perception and reality when it comes to budget allocation, which I think is always, true in any area. But I have a very simple question just to set the tone. How do you define culture?
So, you know what's very interesting is what we did when we founded, when we created SIM, was that we didn't want to define culture for individuals. We wanted them to define culture for themselves. So when we show them an ad, we say, does this ad represent your culture? Do you feel empowered? Do you feel valued? Do you feel, so every individual decides what that means for their culture. We didn't want to say, oh, in the Hispanic market, you want to have music in the background, or you wanted to have a color in the background, or you wanted to have X, Y, and Z, because we didn't want to make that a check mark for marketers. Like, oh, we got it right. Here's our check mark. We're going to definitely connect. When at the end of the day, what's important is to have individuals in front and behind the camera who know what culture is for a given market and can embed those cultural nuances when they're appropriate, depending on what that script is all about, so that they connect in positive and empowering ways with their consumers.
Interesting. Let's go back a little bit to that notion that you talked about budget. And how it relates to growth. I know that you've long been an advocate for demonstrating how high growth brands are also those that implement inclusive marketing. Talk a little bit about that connection.
So what's interesting is that for a really long time, we've been, diverse marketers have been saying, this is the maximization of growth. If you focus on the diverse segments, it's a maximization of growth. And so for a while, we focused on these are the fastest growing populations, but the misconception of, yeah, they're faster growing, but can they afford my product, right? So they're not only the fastest growing segments, but they're graduating from college and higher levels than ever before. They're growing up increasing up the corporate ladder and all of that. But so what we wanted to do is show that there was a direct connection between including these individuals and also the necessity to maximize growth. Because what we don't want to do is say, you're doing the right thing. No, what we wanted to say was, we're doing the smart thing. So what we've done through SIM studies, for example, is not only measure the cultural perspective, but DEIB as well, because consumers today expect DEIB not only internally in corporate hiring practices, but externally in ads as well, because that way consumers feel that they're organic and they're true to what they're saying. And what we learned is that purchase intent increases 5 times more when DEIB and culture aren't included in an ad. So
did you say 5 times more?
5 times
according
more
to your survey?
Yes.
Interesting. All right, I didn't mean to cut you off there. Go ahead. I'm sorry, but that was an impressive fact.
No, and again, I mean, it's about 3.7% higher when you have culture alone, but then when you add that DEIB piece of it, then that goes up to 5 times more. So getting it right and ensuring that you're representing customers in the right way is very important. And for that to happen, again, I can't stress that enough. You have to have the right people in the room who get how to do that.
Now that you make, and you also make a very interesting distinction between doing the smart thing and doing what might be perceived as the right thing. And I think that's one of the subtleties that I think we're already taking from this chat that we're having. Let me ask you something, just out of curiosity. I would think that marketing to diverse segments might be more complex than ever now, or is it actually becoming easier? I don't know.
Well, what we know is what consumers want today. 81% of multicultural consumers today want brands to take public stances on their DEI efforts. And yet 61% of consumers today feel invisible, stereotyped, ill-represented in ads and programs. So when we see that, we understand that we have a disconnect. in the way we're doing marketing. Consumers are smarter than they've ever been before. They're using social media and they're using their wallet in ways that in more powerful ways than we ever have before. They have higher expectation of brands, and the younger the consumer, the higher the expectation. They want their values to be aligned. They will only purchase a brand that is aligned with their values. If that brand does not align with the values, they will find another brand that align with their values. One of the challenges that we have today, though, is that the majority of marketers out there today have never specialized or don't necessarily know how to reach diverse segments. So their specialty is, I'm going to target the general market. And unfortunately, by default, traditionally, that means I'm going to target a white, non-Hispanic country. So when marketers today are only able to target one segment of the population, and our country is becoming more and more diverse, there's also a disconnect there. So yes, is it getting more complex? It's only getting more complex because our country is becoming more diverse and our industry is not keeping up with the times. So one of the first things that we need to do is provide educational resources, which we do for our members and the industry. We need to make sure that every marketer out there is a 21st century marketer, not a 19th or 20th century marketer. And that means that they know how to target all segments, not only some or not only one.
Now you make a good point, and I think that there's probably a lot of marketers who actually feel tremendously challenged or nervous about going about this, and it's probably even exacerbated by today's high-risk political atmosphere that we live in. So let's start. How would you advise them to begin to embark on a inclusive multicultural program that is smart and gets it right in the best ways? Are there steps that they should take? I know you said you have education, but how do they start?
So one of the when we put out the study on understanding where consumers stand today, the reason why we put out that study was because we had conversations with CMOs, and they were nervous about potentially becoming the next target in our country from consumers who were pushing on being exclusive of certain segments and not inclusive of all. So we conducted a study to understand where the majority of consumers were, and are these consumers who are pushing back truly as large as they sound, or are they just being loud? And what we learned that only about they make up only about 11 to 12% of the population, and those who are strongly or definitely in favor of diverse efforts make up about 64% of the population, and then 25% of the population doesn't care either way, right? They have other things to worry about. I'm not sure what that is, but they have other things to worry about. So we didn't only want to provide a study that said, these are the findings. We wanted to give marketers a resource that said, okay, so knowing this, what can I do to minimize the likelihood that I become the next target? Or if I do become the next target, how do I handle that? Because there is truly fear in the industry today, and that's why we're hearing nothing but silence. So some of the things that we told them to do was, number one, align internally. And that not only means with their marketing departments, but it means with their comms department, with their strategy department, and with their C-suites. Because what we've seen is that there's not necessarily an alignment or an understanding of the efforts that are putting forth by the marketing department. And then when they need to do something about it, it's a very quick reaction and not a proactive strategy to any potential challenge that they may have. Number two is consistency and authenticity. Don't show up for holidays alone. Don't show up when it's convenient and then disappear when something else gets your attention. It doesn't mean that you have to target every single diverse segment, but it means that if you decide to target that segment, you have to commit to doing it right, and you have to commit to doing it consistently. Identify strong partners. Those partners can be agencies that have a very knowledgeable staff on diverse segments. It can be nonprofits. It can be any partner that has the loyalty and the belief from that consumer base that they are doing the right thing. By aligning with that partner, you are going to increase that level of trust that consumer has for you, and the likelihood that then others are going to go against you is lower. Make sure that your teams reflect the audiences that you're trying to reach. If you want to reach the Black segment, make sure that you have a strong Black constituency that works for you and in your agencies, because if not, the likelihood that you're going to get it wrong at some point is going to be higher. Measure results and attribute growth to the right segment. And I can't say that enough, because in our industry today, that measurement isn't necessarily happening, or the companies with whom marketers are affiliating themselves are claiming that their measurements are accurate, 95% accurate, when what we've learned is they can be anywhere between 24 and 48% correct. So what does that mean? It means that when they cannot attribute something to a diverse segment, by default, they attribute that to the white non-Hispanic segment because it's the largest segment. So we continue to throw money at that white non-Hispanic segment, believing that they make up the majority of our growth. But the bottom line is that we're not measuring correctly.
Yeah, no, that I think that the issue on measurement is a great point, and I think that that's true in a lot of areas. But you've really made the point of how much of an issue that can be. No, thanks. That I think that was a really good checklist of how people can get started, and I think it makes a lot of sense. You know, it doesn't seem like it's something that would be so extraneous that people couldn't necessarily try to embrace it. Let me just make one comment, because it's always fun to talk about a marketer who's actually doing it, and then I want to go to the survey. I recall at one of the ANA conferences where Mark Pritchard of Procter & Gamble talked about multicultural marketing and his belief that advertising should reflect the percentage makeup of the population. Would you also say that, again, for mass brands, or maybe not mass brands, I don't know, is this also a good starting point when you're trying to sell to a wide range of consumers? And I guess the second part of that question, you were talking about aligning with agencies in your last comments. Is it also an agency's responsibility as much as it is a marketer's to get that right?
Well, ideally, I think that would be a beautiful thing. The problem right now is that where we are as a baseline is so far away from that getting there is going to be very difficult. For example, we are investing 1.8% of all of our dollars on diverse-owned media entities, 1.2 on diverse-owned and targeted. When we look at the universe of where we're investing in targeting diverse segments, and this means in both general market shows where they have a high composition of diverse viewers, as well as in endemic programming, we're at about 17%. When we look at the population and we see where we are in the population, if we include all of the ethnic segments plus LGBTQ plus people with disabilities, we're over 50% of the population. LGBTQ and people with disabilities receive about 0.5% of our media today, even though 1 out of 25 people has some sort of a disability. And LGBTQ make up the younger LGBTQ, obviously more than 20%, older 7%. But when you add allies to that mix, it's over 50% of the population. So we're very far away from where we need to be. So what we want to do is increase that little by little to be exactly where you said, because that is our goal.
No, it's interesting. And you know, there's all the complexities, because I know that you mentioned, you know, aging as another group. And there's probably, I don't want to call it double counting, but there's part of the aging population is also, you know, a diverse population, you know, and so on and so forth. So it becomes, you know, like everything else, numbers can become tricky. But I'm glad I mentioned that about Mark Pritchard, because he has been such an advocate for this for a long time. And I think P&G is doing a great job, you know, as one of the leading marketers doing some things. All right, I promised that I would get to the study. So let's talk about some of the specifics. I took a look at it, and tell me if I'm right. I saw two things that I thought were rather interesting, two kind of massive trends. One is that inclusive marketing wins customers, and the other is that consumers reward brands that uphold DEIB actions. Okay. Talk a little bit more specifically about those two major points, if you agree they are the major points that came out of the study.
No, definitely. I mean, what we learned was that 7 out of 10 consumers are motivated to support brands that do not discriminate. That number is even higher for women. It's actually 8 out of 10. And when you think about the fact that women, for the most part, are the ones who are making decisions about what they're going to buy for their homes and their families, then we're talking about 80% of the population. For every consumer that backs away from a brand because they are targeting a segment that they don't believe they should target, there are actually 5 consumers who are going to stay with a brand because of the same thing. So they might not be as loud, but they are definite. They have the values aligned with that segment that is being targeted, and they're going to make a point of purchasing that product so that the inclusivity is there. What's really interesting that we saw in this study was that consumers who believe in inclusivity don't only believe in inclusivity for themselves. Like I, as a Latina woman, say, "Oh, I want to be included." Yes, I'm very passionate about that, but I'm also very passionate about seeing inclusivity across the board for all segments. And that's what we saw in the study, that either you believe in it or you don't. It's not only for yourself because it's convenience, it's actually across the board. So that was a great thing to find. And what's important is that only 23% of consumers will stick with their brands if a brand is doing something that they don't believe. The others will either boycott it, find another brand, use social media or their wallet, right? Younger consumers are using social media because they don't have the disposable income, but they feel that they have the power of the computer to be able to voice their opinion. So those consumers are not only deciding that they will not stick with a brand that does not align with their values, they're encouraging others to do the same.
Interesting. No, it's very interesting. Just out of curiosity, it was a survey that went to consumers.
It was a survey that into consumers. Over 9,200 consumers were interviewed throughout a period of about 3 weeks, and those consumers reflect our population when it comes to ethnicity, age, identity, geographic location, and so on.
Wow, that's pretty complicated and compelling. All right, so what does this suggest to brands? I mean, I think you've been talking about this all along, but specifically, it sounds like you are saying that ignoring or perhaps not embracing issues of diversity may wind up being a bigger risk than silence, or even making mistakes along the way and not getting it smart, even though you think you might be getting it right. Is that correct? Could you comment on that?
Well, at AIMM, we love to tell our members that it's about progress, not about perfection, because when we talk about perfection, that scares marketers so much, right? And what we want to see is progress in the industry. So does it mean that you're not going to maybe make really big mistakes like some brands have made? Yeah, but those mistakes have been made because they have not had the right people in the room to vet the ideas and to vet the final storylines, right? So in order to minimize the likelihood that that progress leads to a barrier, it's important for marketers to have the right people in the room. And we've seen instances where, Pepsi or Dove is examples that are used very often, right? With a Kris Jenner or Kylie Jenner, whichever Jenner, I don't even know their names, but the Jenner family was involved in the ad, as well as the one with Dove where the woman took her shirt off and went from a black shirt to a white shirt. I mean, those were extremely offensive ads that could have been tested by, entities like SIM, for example, to make sure that they understood what the perception was. But had they had the right people in the room, somebody would have said, whoa, stop right there. This is not going to work, right? So that's actually very important. But it's also important to this point because silence has just been so loud for those of us who are working on inclusive marketing right now. And it's important to note that silence is a decision that marketers are making. And that silence is speaking very loudly to diverse consumers. So, silence is being complicit in many ways. So if marketers want to be inclusive, they have to speak about their passion for inclusivity. We have to see that inclusivity in their hiring practices. We have to see that inclusivity in their ads, because the silence right now is not working for a lot of people.
No, it's interesting. It's interesting that, on everything, political issues, whatever it is, silence has become a choice, sometimes out of fear, sometimes out of ignorance, sometimes out of, as you say, looking for perfection. Let me ask you something that's very related. The Internationalists recently did a survey on the role of brands in a global crisis. Not that we haven't been through a few global crises in the last couple of years. One issue that came through is that corporate culture and brand values are certainly more difficult to foster when society is divided. I'm just curious if you're finding that's true for your work with DEIB, or maybe it could be just the opposite, that DEIB could be a solution for some of these times.
Well, what we've seen is it's only 12 to 13% of individuals who feel. So when we look at the rest of the population, we have about 25% that, again, don't care. And we have the rest of the population, 62 to 64% who believe in inclusiveness. So is that divided? You're always going to have a divided society. But the good thing here that we're seeing is that the majority of consumers are like-minded. And that like-mindedness means when it comes to inclusivity. Employees today, especially younger employees, are choosing the companies with which they work because they want to share common values. They want to feel not only that they're paid well, that they, that they're working for a company that's going to treat them well, but that they have a sense of belonging as well, right? And that belonging piece is really important. We've gone from calling a DEI practice to a DEIB practice. And that belonging part is incredibly important because that is helping with retention, and it's helping with that brand value externally, because these individuals are becoming brand advocates as well, right? So are brands going to, if they stand for something, going to lose some employees or lose a consumer base? The likelihood is, yeah, they might. But I, as a business owner, can tell you that I'd rather have the right people working for me who believe in what my company stands for than people who don't. So it means that then you find others who come in to work for you who do indeed share those common values. And I think that's really important, because that's where passion comes in, and that's where pride comes in working for your corporation or in buying products that you feel are aligned with your own values.
I think you're right. And I think we've seen that really increase since COVID, when so many people made choices about the kind of work they wanted to do and how they wanted to work. So it all seems to be at least coming together in some way. Just a couple more questions before we go, and I feel like we could talk perhaps for days, never mind for hours. I'm really curious to go back to the beginning about the conversations that we're having about growth brands and those that embrace DEIB. Can you just cite a couple of quick examples of some that you like to highlight in terms of those that incorporated better inclusivity and then also showed great brand growth?
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely share some examples of we have AIMM members that have done an incredible job. We have I like to give the example of Denny's when John Dillon was the CMO there, and then he moved to CEO after that. And when he started coming to AIMM, to our meetings, he came because he was one of the marketers who, I'm at a CMO position, but I've never targeted a diverse consumer base. And I know that Denny's is a perfect brand that targets the entire America, right? Not only some. So he started coming to AIMM. He brought in specialized agencies that were members of AIMM to work with them, and the growth that Denny's saw was absolutely incredible. I mean, in the way the change and how they said, when the ads that they had were so inclusive, the people who were at the Denny's restaurants, they reflected a restaurant at Denny's, right? And before that, it was just a homogeneous consumer base that was at that restaurant. Another great example is Ulta Beauty. Ulta Beauty is a brand that when we started working with Ulta Beauty, many years ago, they asked us, okay, we need help because we've so far only targeted and reflected a young, beautiful white woman, mostly blonde, sometimes a redhead, but mostly blonde white woman. And that's who represented the brand. They call themselves the Barbie doll brand because that's what came to mind to them. So we started with them working, and we created their strategic plan for the Hispanic market. And at first they had said, we want to target a Hispanic market that is more acculturated, because that way we could do English spots and, and include them in English. But we did some research when we were working with them, and we learned that there was not a single retailer out there who was targeting Latinas in Spanish. Even though beauty is so important for the Hispanic woman, there was not a single retailer out there who was targeting Latinas. So they had that advantage of being the first to enter that space. So they did that. They targeted both acculturated and non-acculturated Latinas, and their sales soared. If anybody follows Ulta Beauty stock for the last few years, you'll see how fast that brand and that company has grown. They moved on to targeting the Black woman. They moved on to targeting the LGBTQ segment, to the Asian segment. Right now, when you see what that brand represents and you compare that to 10 years ago or 8 years ago, you would think it's a completely different company, but the growth of that company has been amazing. So yes, they did the right thing, but it was also the smart thing, and the numbers prove it.
Very nice examples, really, really great examples. Okay, what if you had one piece of advice for marketers, what would it be? Just quick off the top of your head.
Stop doubting diverse marketing. Stop doing the same thing that you're doing. Stop doubting that this is going to maximize growth, because we have so many examples where it does. And those who are not doing it are not maximizing their growth.
Well said. And what's next on your agenda for AIMM?
Next are the 2024 growth fronts. We conducted our growth fronts first time around this year, 2023, in beginning of March. And we did that again to address that inequity that we're finding in the investment space. Last year we had only diverse owned and targeted. This year we're increasing that to a larger space within the diverse targeted segment. But the importance of this is that, number one, we're making a statement that we need to increase our investments in these spaces for diverse owned, for diverse targeted, for diverse managed, for diverse, for all of diverse targeted in all of these spaces. Even if it's foreign owned, like for example, in the Asian sector, the majority of companies that are media based are foreign owned, even though they have offices here and companies here that are managed by that segment. But in order to reach that Asian segment, it's really important that we invest in those properties. So, those are going to be represented as well. We need to do something right now to increase and find equity in the media investment space, because right now, where with 98% of companies that are being invested in that are Black, that are not Hispanic, that are not Black, that are not Asian, that are not even women, that are white men owned, there's a disconnect, and we need to change that.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see, and of course it's a long process, because you have to encourage people to create those companies. It's an interesting tale. And I guess the only other positive thing that we can all think about is that at some point, regardless of our ethnicity or whatever else, we're all going to be part of that aging sector.
Yes, that is very
all together.
You know what? That aging sector is getting larger and larger all the time. And unfortunately, we're not seeing those faces in our marketing efforts as often as we should. AARP is doing a great job at creating awareness on the need to place all ages in our ads and programs. And I think that, and not only in all ages in our ads and programs, but today's aging population is much more mobile, much more young feeling. And so we need to stop reflecting these individuals as needing help and reflect them in empowering ways, because that's what anybody over 50 wants to see.
No, I think you're right, and I think we can probably even speak to that. But on another note, it's been a wonderful pleasure talking with you, and I'm sure we'll talk more, because this is just a beginning, and I have so many other questions. But I think let's keep it there. Let's keep some of these lessons out there, and to be continued, no doubt.
I had a great time speaking to you, and I look forward to coming back again. Thank you for the inclusion. We really appreciate it at AIMM. It's, our voices can only get to our members if it's not for individuals like you who have a commitment to what we're doing. So thank you.
A pleasure. The Internationalist focuses on the continual reinvention of marketing by highlighting inspirational marketers around the world and their ideas as they move the industry forward. Internationalist Marketing TV shares these perspectives through interviews and personal stories. Thanks so much for watching. If you find this kind of content helpful, please click like or subscribe. Again, thanks so much.